The rain had just stopped when Vincent Blackwell's limousine pulled up to La Lumiere, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. The kind of place where a single meal could cost more than most people's monthly rent. Vincent didn't just walk into the restaurant. He made an entrance. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor as he strode in, surrounded by 4 business associates who laughed at every word he said, whether it was funny or not. "Table for 5. He announced to the hostess, not bothering to make eye contact. "The private corner booth." I called ahead. The hostess smiled politely, the kind of smile that comes from years of dealing with difficult customers. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell, right this way." Vincent was 39 years old and worth about $3 billion, give or take a few million. He'd made his fortune in tech, creating an app that became so essential that half the world couldn't imagine living without it. The money had come fast, and somewhere along the way so had the arrogance. He'd forgotten what it was like to struggle, to worry about bills, to treat people with basic respect. Tonight was special. His company had just closed a deal that would make him even richer, and he was in the mood to celebrate. More importantly, he was in the mood to show off. As they settled into the booth, Vincent loosened his tie and leaned back like he owned the place. Which, given how much money he spent here, he practically did. His associates congratulated him again, shaking his hand, patting his back. Vincent soaked it all in. That's when she walked up to their table. Nina Hayes was 28 years old, and this was her second shift of the day. She'd been on her feet since 7 that morning, working a breakfast shift at a diner in Brooklyn before taking the subway to Manhattan for her evening shift at La Lumiere. The tips were better here, and she needed every dollar she could get. Between rent, student loans, and her tuition at the conservatory, she was always one emergency away from disaster. But none of that showed on her face. She approached the table with a warm smile, her notepad ready. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to La Lumiere. My name is Nina, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Vincent barely glanced at her. He was busy scrolling through his phone, checking the stock prices that would rise even higher tomorrow when news of his deal went public. "Champagne," he said, not looking up. "The Dom Perignon. 2 bottles. Actually, make it 3. We're celebrating." "Excellent choice," Nina said, writing it down. "I'll have that right out for you." She was about to leave when Vincent finally looked up. His eyes swept over her, not seeing a person, just a servant. "You know what Dom Perignon is, right? It's expensive champagne. The good stuff, not the cheap sparkling wine you probably drink." His associates chuckled nervously. Nina's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes. She'd dealt with people like this before. The restaurant attracted them like moths to a flame. "I'm familiar with it, sir. I'll bring it right away." "Good girl," Vincent said dismissively, already back on his phone. Nina walked away, her jaw tight. In the service industry, you learn to swallow your pride. You learn to smile through the condescension, the casual cruelty, the customers who treated you like you were invisible or, worse, like you were beneath them. The rent didn't care about your dignity. The bills didn't stop because someone hurt your feelings. She returned with the champagne, opening each bottle with practiced ease. As she poured, Vincent launched into a loud story about how he'd negotiated the deal, talking about millions of dollars like they were pocket change. His voice carried across the restaurant, drawing annoyed glances from other diners. "And I told them," Vincent said, laughing, "if you can't afford to play with the big boys, maybe you should stick to lemonade stands." More forced laughter from his associates. Nina took their food orders, navigating Vincent's constant interruptions and changes. He wanted the steak, but not that steak, the other one. "No, wait, tell the chef to prepare it differently, and if the sauce wasn't perfect, he'd send it back." He said all this while barely acknowledging that Nina was a human being standing there, writing down his demands. As she walked away to place their order, she heard Vincent call out, "Hey, sweetheart." She turned back, her professional smile still in place. "Yes, sir." "You go to school or something? You look young to be just a waitress." The way he said "just a waitress" made it sound like the lowest thing a person could be. Nina felt her face warm, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm studying music at the conservatory, sir. I'm a pianist." Vincent's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "A pianist? In a restaurant?" "Well, isn't that something?" He turned to his friends. "Another starving artist. How original." They laughed on cue. "Let me guess, you're going to be the next big thing?" Play at Carnegie Hall. I'm working on my craft, Nina said simply. Everyone starts somewhere. Sure, Vincent said, waving his hand dismissively. You know what the difference is between a large pizza and a musician? A pizza can feed a family of 4. He burst out laughing at his own joke. But hey, good luck with that dream. Maybe in 10 years you'll be playing at airport lounges. That's something, right? One of his associates looked uncomfortable. Vincent, maybe, what? I'm just being realistic. The world doesn't need more pianists. It needs people who can actually do something useful. Build things. Create value. Not just press keys on an instrument. Nina nodded slowly, her knuckles white as she gripped her notepad. I'll go check on your order. As she walked toward the kitchen, Vincent's voice followed her. Don't forget to bring more bread. And butter. The real stuff, not margarine. In the kitchen, Nina leaned against the wall for a moment, taking a deep breath. The head chef, Pierre, glanced at her with sympathy. He'd heard everything. Table 5? He asked. Table 5, she confirmed. Rich jerks. They're always the worst tippers, too. Nina managed to smile. It's fine. Just another night, but it wasn't fine. As she delivered their meals, Vincent continued his performance. He sent his steak back twice, complained about the temperature of the room, and made increasingly personal comments about Nina's career choice. His associates grew quieter, clearly embarrassed, but no one told him to stop. When you're dining with a billionaire, you don't risk offending him. Then something shifted. The restaurant's piano player, an elderly man named George who'd been playing soft jazz in the corner for years, suddenly stood up and walked toward the manager, his hand on his chest. Nina watched as they had a quiet, urgent conversation. George didn't look well. The manager, Mr. Chen, approached Nina as she was clearing Table 5's appetizer plates. He pulled her aside discreetly. Nina, I know this is unusual, but George isn't feeling well. He needs to go home. I know you're a pianist. Would you be willing to fill in? Just for an hour or two? I'll pay you extra and you can keep your tips from serving. Nina glanced back at Table 5, where Vincent was loudly telling another story, his voice dominating the entire restaurant. The thought of walking over to that piano, of putting herself on display in front of him, made her stomach knot. But she also thought about the extra money. The tuition payment due next week. The hole in her winter coat she couldn't afford to replace. Okay, she said quietly. Give me 5 minutes to change. The staff changing room was small and cramped, tucked away behind the kitchen where customers never ventured. Nina pulled off her server's apron with shaking hands. She couldn't quite tell if it was nerves about performing or anger from the way Vincent had treated her all evening. Probably both. George had left his spare performance outfit hanging on a hook. A simple black jacket and bow tie that the restaurant's pianist always wore. Nina slipped on the jacket over her white shirt. It was too big, but it would do. She caught her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. She barely recognized herself. Good. Maybe Vincent wouldn't recognize her either. She pulled her hair back into a neat bun, different from the ponytail she'd worn while serving. Her hands were still trembling slightly. Not from fear of playing. She'd performed in front of hundreds of people during her conservatory recitals. But something about tonight felt different, heavier. Mr. Chen knocked softly on the door. Nina, you ready? No pressure, but whenever you're comfortable. She took one last deep breath and opened the door. I'm ready. The walk from the back of the restaurant to the piano felt like miles. The grand piano sat on a raised platform in the corner, bathed in soft golden light. It was a beautiful instrument. A Steinway that probably cost more than Nina would make in 5 years. George had let her play it a few times during slow nights, and she'd fallen in love with its rich, warm tone. Nina kept her eyes down as she crossed the dining room, weaving between tables. She didn't look at Table 5, didn't want to see Vincent's face, didn't want to give him another chance to mock her. As far as she was concerned, she was just the pianist now, not the server he'd spent the last hour belittling. She settled onto the piano bench and adjusted her position. The familiar feel of the keys under her fingers calmed her nerves. This was her world, her language. Here she wasn't someone to be looked down on. Here she was fluent. Nina started with something simple and safe. A soft jazz standard that George usually opened with. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease, filling the restaurant with gentle music. The conversations around the room softened as people unconsciously lowered their voices to match the mood of the music. At Table 5, Vincent was in the middle of another story. He didn't even glance toward the piano. Why would he? The background music meant nothing to him. It was just noise to fill the space while important people like him conducted their business. So then I told the board, Vincent said, refilling his champagne glass, either you're with me, or you can explain to the shareholders why you passed on $1 billion opportunity. His associates nodded, murmuring their approval. But one of them, a younger man named Robert, had noticed the change in pianist. Hey, is that a different player? He asked. Vincent finally glanced toward the piano, squinting slightly. He could see someone in the standard black jacket and bow tie, seated with their back partially to the room. Just another employee, another piece of the scenery. Who cares? Vincent said. As long as they keep it quiet. I can barely hear myself think sometimes in these places. Nina heard his voice carry across the room. Of course he complained about that too. She felt a spark of something hot and defiant flare up in her chest. She transitioned smoothly from the jazz standard into something with a little more complexity. A bit of Gershwin, something that demanded attention. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence. A few diners looked up from their meals, appreciating the skill. Nina felt the familiar rush that came with performing, that sense of being fully present, fully alive. For these moments, nothing else mattered. Not the aching feet, not the student loan debt, not the rent that was always due too soon. She was deep into the Gershwin piece when she heard Vincent's voice again, louder now, fueled by 3 bottles of champagne. You know what's funny? He announced to his table, though his voice carried to half the restaurant. Everyone thinks they're special. Everyone thinks they've got this unique talent that's going to make them rich and famous. Like that waitress, what's her name? The piano player wannabe. Nina's fingers almost stumbled on the keys. Almost. But years of training kicked in, and she kept playing smoothly, her face carefully neutral. Nina, Robert said quietly. I think her name was Nina. Right, Nina, sweet girl, sure, but completely delusional. You know how many piano players there are in New York? Thousands. Tens of thousands, all fighting for the same 3 jobs that actually pay money, and she thinks she's going to make it? Vincent laughed, shaking his head. I give her 2 years before she gives up and gets a real job. Maybe she'll be lucky and marry some guy who can actually support her little hobby. One of the other men at the table shifted uncomfortably. Maybe she's really talented, though. You never know. Talented? Vincent scoffed. You want to know about real talent? My grandmother, God rest her soul, she was talented. Played piano like you wouldn't believe. Self-taught, can you imagine? Grew up in poverty. Didn't have a fancy conservatory education. Just learned by listening and practicing on a beat-up old upright piano in her apartment. His voice softened slightly, and for a moment, something almost human flickered across his face. She used to play this one piece for me when I was a kid. Before we had money, before any of this. He gestured vaguely at the expensive restaurant around them, some complicated classical thing. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I'd sit on the floor next to her while she played. It was the only time our cramped little apartment felt like a palace. Robert leaned forward, genuinely curious. This was the first time all night Vincent had said anything that wasn't boasting or cruelty. What piece was it? Vincent frowned, trying to remember. Something by Chopin, I think. Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2, yeah, that was it. She must have played it 1,000 times. Said it reminded her of her own mother, my great-grandmother, who I never met. He took another drink, and the moment of vulnerability passed as quickly as it had come. His voice returned to its usual arrogant tone. But see, that's the difference. My grandmother had real talent. Natural gift. Not like these kids today who think a few years of school makes them musicians. Real talent is something you're born with. You either have it or you don't. So what happened to her piano playing? Robert asked. Vincent shrugged. Life happened. She had kids, had to work 3 jobs to keep food on the table. The piano playing was just a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. By the time I made money and could buy her the best piano in the world, her hands were too arthritic to play. Broke my heart, honestly. He paused, swirling the champagne in his glass. Then his face brightened with a sudden idea. The kind of idea that seemed brilliant after too much expensive wine. You know what? He said, his voice rising again. I'll make a bet. I'll make a promise right here, right now. If anyone in this restaurant can play that piece, my grandmother's Nocturne, play it perfectly the way she used to, I'll marry them on the spot. His associates laughed. assuming he was joking. "No, I'm serious," Vincent insisted, grinning widely. "I'm supposed to propose to Melissa next month anyway. But if someone can play that piece, really play it with feeling, the way my grandmother did, I'll cancel the engagement and marry them instead. Man or woman doesn't matter. That piece is worth more to me than Melissa's trust fund." "Vincent, you're drunk," Robert said, but he was smiling. "Drunk on success, maybe. But I mean it. That piece is impossible. It looks simple, but the emotion, the timing, the touch you need, 1 in a million people could play it right. So go ahead, ask the piano player over there. Ask anyone. I guarantee you nobody in this overpriced restaurant can do it." He raised his glass in a mock toast toward the piano, still not really looking at who was playing. "Play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major and I'll marry you. That's a Vincent Blackwell promise, and I always keep my promises in business." Nina's hands had gone still on the keys. She'd stopped playing at some point during Vincent's speech, though she couldn't remember exactly when. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. That piece. Of all the pieces in the world, he had to mention that one. She knew it. She knew it by heart, every note, every pause, every subtle shift in dynamics. Her own grandmother had taught it to her when Nina was just 7 years old. Her grandmother, who'd also grown up poor, who'd also played on a battered old piano in a tiny apartment, who'd passed away 3 years ago, leaving Nina her pearl-handled cufflinks and a recording of her playing that very nocturne. Nina looked down at her hands, hovering over the keys. She could walk away right now, finish her shift, collect her tips, go home, pretend she hadn't heard anything, or she could do something she might regret. Something reckless and probably stupid. Her fingers found the opening notes, soft, delicate, like a whisper in the dark. The first bars of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated across the restaurant, pure and clear. The first notes were almost too soft to hear, like a secret being whispered across the room. Nina's right hand carried the melody, delicate and haunting, while her left hand provided the gentle accompaniment. This was how her grandmother had taught her to play it, not as a performance piece meant to show off, but as a conversation between the piano and the silence. Within seconds, the entire restaurant began to quiet down. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Forks were set down gently on plates. Even the waiters stopped moving, standing still wherever they were, listening. Nina felt the music flow through her fingers the way it always did when she played this piece. She wasn't thinking about the notes anymore. She'd played them so many times that they were part of her, like breathing. Instead, she was thinking about her grandmother's small living room in Queens, the afternoon light coming through the curtains, the smell of soup simmering on the stove, the feeling of being 7 years old and sitting next to her grandmother on the piano bench, watching those wrinkled hands move across the keys with such grace. This piece, her grandmother had told her, is about remembering, about holding on to the beautiful moments even when life gets hard. At table 5, Vincent had been reaching for his champagne glass when the music registered. His hand stopped in midair. That melody. He knew that melody. "Wait," he said quietly. Then louder, "Wait, what is that?" Robert looked at him, confused. "What's what?" But Vincent wasn't listening. He was staring at the piano now, really looking for the first time all evening. The pianist's back was to him, but something about the way the music was being played, the specific phrasing, the tiny pauses between certain notes, it was exactly how his grandmother used to play it. His champagne glass lowered slowly to the table, forgotten. Nina moved into the second section of the piece, where the melody climbs higher, becoming more passionate. Her fingers pressed deeper into the keys, drawing out a richer, more emotional sound. This was the part where her grandmother used to close her eyes, swaying slightly with the music. Nina found herself doing the same thing now, lost in the memory and the moment. A woman at a nearby table had tears streaming down her face. Her husband reached across and took her hand. They didn't say anything, just sat there holding hands and listening. Mr. Chen stood near the kitchen entrance, a slight smile on his face. He'd known Nina had talent. She'd mentioned her studies, and George had told him she was good. But this was something else. This was the kind of playing that made you forget where you were, that transported you somewhere else entirely. Vincent pushed his chair back and stood up, his legs feeling oddly unsteady. And it wasn't from the champagne. He took a few steps toward the piano, drawn by the music like a moth to flame. His business associates looked at each other, unsure what was happening. The piece built toward its emotional peak, the part that always made Nina's chest tight. Her grandmother used to say this was where your heart broke open just a little bit, in the good way, the way that reminds you you're alive and capable of feeling things deeply. Nina's fingers moved with increasing intensity, pulling every bit of emotion out of the instrument that she could. The Steinway responded beautifully, its rich tone filling every corner of the restaurant. The sound seemed to hang in the air even after the notes ended, like the last bit of light before sunset. Vincent was halfway across the restaurant now, walking slowly toward the piano. His mind was racing. It couldn't be. There was no way. That song was rare, complicated, not something just anyone could play, and definitely not played like this with this exact feeling, these exact interpretations. Nina began the final section, where the melody returns to its original quiet gentleness. Like a lullaby, like saying goodbye to someone you love. Her fingers were lighter on the keys now, tender and careful. Each note was placed with precision and purpose. She could feel the entire room holding its breath. The last chord faded into silence. Nina held her hands on the keys for a moment longer, the way her grandmother had taught her. "Let the silence after the music be part of the performance too," she'd said. "Let people sit with what they just felt." For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the applause started. It began with the woman who'd been crying, then spread like wildfire through the restaurant. People stood up from their tables, clapping. Some were wiping their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in amazement. Nina finally opened her eyes and looked up, startled by the intensity of the response. She'd been so lost in the music that she'd forgotten where she was. The applause washed over her and she felt her face flush. She stood and gave a small bow, unused to this kind of attention. That's when she saw him. Vincent was standing about 10 feet from the piano, his face completely drained of color. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, recognition, something else? Their eyes met, and Nina saw the exact moment when he realized who she was. His mouth opened slightly. His hand came up to his face, covering his mouth as if he'd just said something terrible and was trying to take it back. Because, of course, he had said terrible things. All evening, to her, about her. The applause continued around them, but Nina and Vincent were locked in their own moment. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. "You," Vincent said so quietly that Nina almost couldn't hear him over the clapping. "You're the server. You're Nina." She stood there in George's oversized jacket, her hands clasped in front of her. "Yes." "That piece," Vincent's voice cracked slightly. "That was Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major." "I know what it was," Nina said calmly. "I played it." The applause was finally dying down. People were returning to their seats, still buzzing with excitement, already pulling out their phones to tell friends about what they'd just witnessed. But Vincent didn't move. He stood there looking at Nina like he'd just seen a ghost. "My grandmother," he started, then stopped. "Tried again. That was my grandmother's favorite piece. I just said, at the table I said, you said if anyone could play it, you'd marry them." Nina finished for him. Her voice was steady, but inside she was shaking. Not from nerves anymore. From anger. From the satisfaction of proving him completely wrong. "You said it was impossible. That only 1 in a million people could play it right." Vincent's face went from white to red. "I didn't know. I didn't realize that you could..." "That I could what? Actually play piano? That I wasn't just some delusional waitress with a hopeless dream?" Nina kept her voice low, aware that people were starting to watch them. "You spent all evening making assumptions about me. About what I could or couldn't do. About who I was." "I'm sorry," Vincent said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. "I'm so sorry. I was drunk and stupid and I said things I shouldn't have said." "You weren't that drunk," Nina replied. "You were just being yourself." That hit him harder than any insult could have. He flinched visibly. Robert had appeared at Vincent's side along with the other business associates. They looked uncomfortable, clearly having heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "Vincent," Robert said carefully, "maybe we should go." But Vincent was still staring at Nina. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "That wasn't just technical skill. That was... My grandmother taught me," Nina said, "when I was 7 years old. She grew up poor too, just like yours. Played on an old upright piano in a tiny apartment. Worked 3 jobs to support her family. Never got to pursue music professionally because life got in the way. She paused, letting that sink in. But she taught me everything she knew. And unlike what you said earlier, Mr. Blackwell, real talent isn't just something you're born with. It's something you work for. Something you earn through years of practice and dedication and sacrifice. Vincent opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? How do you apologize for that kind of cruelty? How do you take back assumptions that cut so deep? Nina took off George's jacket and folded it carefully over her arm. She was done performing, done with this conversation, done with this entire night. For what it's worth, she said, looking Vincent directly in the eyes. I don't want to marry you. I don't play music for proposals from men who can't see people's worth until it's literally performed in front of them. I play because music was my grandmother's gift to me, just like it was your grandmother's gift to you. She stepped down from the piano platform and walked past Vincent, past his speechless associates, past the tables full of people who were definitely going to be gossiping about this for weeks. Mr. Chen caught her near the kitchen. Nina, that was extraordinary. Take the rest of the night off. With pay. She nodded, grateful, and disappeared into the back to change back into her regular clothes. Vincent stood in the middle of La Lumiere for a long moment after Nina disappeared into the back. The restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm, but he felt frozen in place. His associates were gathering their things, clearly ready to leave. Robert touched his arm gently. Come on, man. Let's get you home. The drive back to Vincent's penthouse was quiet. Nobody knew what to say. What do you tell a billionaire who just got publicly humbled by the woman he'd spent all evening mocking? Robert tried once, opening his mouth to speak, but Vincent just shook his head and stared out the window at the New York skyline. When he got home, Vincent didn't turn on the lights. He walked straight to his living room and sat on the leather couch in the dark, still hearing that music in his head, still seeing Nina's face when she'd looked at him, not with anger exactly, but with something worse, disappointment, like he was exactly what she'd expected him to be. He pulled out his phone and opened his contacts, scrolled to Melissa's name. His girlfriend of 2 years, the woman he was supposed to propose to next month. They'd met at a charity gala, both there because it was good for their public image. She came from old money. He came from new money. On paper, they were perfect for each other. But could he even remember the last time they'd had a real conversation? The last time either of them had shown the other something true about themselves? Vincent put the phone down without calling. He got up and walked to the room he never used anymore. His office had a piano in it. A beautiful grand piano that cost more than most people's cars. He'd bought it 3 years ago in a moment of nostalgia, thinking maybe he'd learn to play, honor his grandmother's memory somehow. But he'd never even opened it. It sat there like an expensive piece of furniture gathering dust. Vincent sat on the bench and lifted the cover off the keys. He pressed one key and the note rang out in the empty room pure and clear. He didn't know how to play. Didn't even know which key he'd just pressed. But he sat there for an hour, occasionally pressing different keys, thinking about his grandmother. About how she would feel if she could see what he'd become. The next morning, Vincent woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with champagne. He went through his usual routine: shower, expensive coffee, checking his stock portfolio, but everything felt different. Like he was seeing his life from the outside and not particularly liking what he saw. He called his assistant. Cancel my meetings today. All of them, sir. You have the board presentation at 10 and I said cancel them. Reschedule for next week. Vincent got dressed and took a cab instead of his driver. He had the address of La Lumiere in his phone, and he went there even though he knew the restaurant wouldn't open until dinner service. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for. Maybe to apologize to Mr. Chen for his behavior, maybe to leave a note for Nina. But when he got there, the place was dark, closed. He stood outside for a few minutes feeling foolish, then walked away. Over the next few weeks, something shifted inside Vincent. He couldn't stop thinking about what Nina had said. About how his grandmother had worked 3 jobs, had given up her music for her family. How she'd been talented and passionate, and had sacrificed everything. And he'd built an empire on the foundation she'd laid with her hard work, only to become the kind of man who looked down on people exactly like she had been. He started noticing things he'd ignored before. The way his housekeeper avoided eye contact. The way his driver never spoke unless spoken to. The way waiters and servers and doormen all treated him with the same careful politeness that Nina had used before she played that night. Not respect. fear, or maybe just professional detachment from someone who didn't see them as real people. Vincent called Melissa and ended things. She took it better than he expected. "Honestly," she said over the phone, "I was getting bored anyway. You're not exactly the most exciting person, Vincent." That stung, but it was probably true. He thought about trying to find Nina to apologize properly, but what would he even say? "Sorry I treated you like you were worthless? Sorry I judged your entire life in 5 seconds?" Sorry seemed too small for what he'd done. Instead, Vincent did something he hadn't done in years. He started actually thinking about other people. Not in the abstract way where you donate money to charity and feel good about yourself, but really thinking about the humans behind the services he used every day. He learned his driver's name was Thomas, and Thomas had a daughter who wanted to be a veterinarian. His housekeeper was named Ruth, and she was sending money back home to the Philippines to support her elderly parents. The doorman, Carlos, was studying for his real estate license at night. Vincent started asking questions, started listening to the answers, started seeing people, but it still wasn't enough. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone. He'd go to bed thinking about Nina's words. Real talent isn't just something you're born with. It's something you work for. 2 months after that night at La Lumiere, Vincent was sitting in his office when his secretary buzzed him. "Mr. Blackwell, there's a gentleman here asking to speak with you. He says it's about a restaurant server." Vincent's heart jumped. Send him in. But it wasn't Nina. It was an older man, maybe 60, with kind eyes and calloused hands. "Mr. Blackwell, my name is David Hayes. I'm Nina's father." Vincent stood up quickly, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been in years. "Mr. Hayes, Please, sit down. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" "I'm fine, thank you." David sat down but didn't relax. "I'm not here to yell at you if that's what you're worried about. Nina doesn't even know I'm here. How did you find me?" "It's not hard to find Vincent Blackwell," David said with a slight smile. "You're on the cover of magazines. But I came because I wanted to tell you something. Nina has been offered a position. A real position as a pianist at the Thornton Music Hall. It's a small venue, but it's prestigious. She starts next month." "That's wonderful," Vincent said, and he meant it. "She's incredibly talented, she is. But she almost didn't take it." David leaned forward. "See, after that night at the restaurant, something happened. People who were there started talking. One of them posted a video online. Not of the confrontation, thank God, but of her playing. Just the music. No context. And it went viral." Vincent pulled out his phone and searched. Sure enough, there it was. A video titled "Mystery Pianist Stuns Exclusive Restaurant." It had 3 million views. The comments were full of people asking who she was, where they could hear her play again. "Nina was mortified," David continued. "She's private. Doesn't like attention. And she was convinced that the only reason she got the job offer was because of some stupid internet video, not because of her actual years of hard work and training." "But that's not true," Vincent said. "She earned that position. Anyone who heard her play would know that. I agree. And I finally convinced her of that. But Mr. Blackwell, I came here to tell you something else. That night changed my daughter. She came home crying, and Nina never cries. She told me what you said to her. About her dreams being worthless. About musicians being a waste of space." Vincent felt sick. "Mr. Hayes, I am so sorry. I was drunk and arrogant and cruel. There's no excuse for—" David held up his hand. "Let me finish. Yes, you hurt her, but you also gave her something: fire, determination. She practiced harder after that night than I've ever seen. She said she was going to prove to herself, not to you, but to herself, that she was right to chase this dream. That music mattered. That art mattered." He stood up. "I don't know if you're a good man or a bad man, Mr. Blackwell. But I know my daughter is a good woman, and she's going to be fine. Better than fine. She's going to be extraordinary. I just thought you should know that." Vincent walked David to the door, his mind racing. After he left, Vincent sat back down at his desk and stared at the video of Nina playing. The comments underneath ranged from amazement to curiosity, to people sharing their own stories about music and dreams. He closed the video and opened a new document on his computer. He started typing. An idea was forming, something he'd been thinking about for weeks but hadn't had the courage to act on. By the time the sun set, Vincent had drafted a complete proposal. Not for a business deal. For something else entirely. A foundation. an organization dedicated to supporting people in service industries who had dreams beyond their day jobs. Scholarships for servers going to school, grants for cooks who wanted to open their own restaurants, funding for retail workers pursuing art or music or writing. He'd call it the Grace Blackwell Foundation after his grandmother, the woman who'd worked 3 jobs and still found time to play piano. The woman who would have been ashamed of the man he'd become but might be proud of the man he was trying to be. Vincent picked up his phone and called his lawyer. "I need you to help me set up a charitable foundation. Something real, not just a tax shelter. I want to do this right. It wasn't enough. It would never erase what he'd said to Nina. But it was a start." 6 months passed like pages turning in a book Vincent didn't know he was writing. The Grace Blackwell Foundation launched on a Tuesday morning in April. Vincent stood in the small office space they'd rented, looking at the 3 employees he'd hired. Not high-powered executives, just good people who believed in the mission, people who'd worked service jobs themselves and understood what it meant to chase a dream while your feet ached and your pockets stayed empty. The foundation gave its first scholarship to a woman who cleaned office buildings at night and went to community college during the day. She cried when they called her. Actually cried on the phone. Vincent had never made anyone cry from happiness before. He'd made people cry from fear of losing their jobs, from stress, from anger. But never from joy. It felt different, better. He still went to work at his company, still made business decisions and attended board meetings. But something had shifted inside him. When he walked into buildings now, he noticed the security guards, learned their names, asked about their families. The first few times people looked at him strangely. Vincent Blackwell being nice? What was the angle? But he kept doing it anyway. His therapist, a woman he'd started seeing after that night at La Lumiere, told him that change was a process, not a destination. "You're going to mess up sometimes," she said. "You're going to catch yourself being impatient or dismissive. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness and correction." She was right. He did mess up. Old habits crept back in. But now he noticed them and apologized. Actually apologized, not the corporate non-apology he used to give. Real apologies that acknowledged harm and promised to do better. He thought about Nina often. Too often, probably. Not in a romantic way, though his assistant had joked about that once and he'd shut it down immediately. He thought about her because she represented something he was trying to understand. Dignity. The kind that couldn't be bought or performed. The kind that came from knowing your worth regardless of who saw it. The foundation grew. By month 4, they'd given out 30 scholarships. By month 6, they'd funded 8 small businesses and created a mentorship program, pairing successful entrepreneurs with service workers who had business ideas. Vincent put in $12 million of his own money and raised another 8 from donors. Then came the letter. It arrived at the foundation office on a Thursday. His secretary brought it to him during lunch. "This came for you," marked personal. The envelope was simple. Cream-colored paper. Nice handwriting. He opened it carefully and pulled out a single page. "Dear Mr. Blackwell, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Nina Hayes. You might remember me from La Lumiere restaurant. I've been following the work of your foundation, and I wanted to tell you that it's making a real difference. One of my former co-workers received a scholarship last month. She's going to school to become a paralegal now. She told me it changed her life. I'm writing because the Thornton Music Hall, where I now work as resident pianist, is hosting a benefit concert next month for arts education. We're looking for sponsors and partners. Given your foundation's mission, I thought there might be alignment. If you're interested, please contact the hall's director. I think we could do good work together. Respectfully, Nina Hayes." Vincent read the letter 3 times. Then he picked up the phone and called the Thornton Music Hall himself. The benefit concert was set for a Friday evening in October. The hall was beautiful, intimate, with perfect acoustics. Vincent arrived an hour early to meet with the director and review the program. His foundation was now the presenting sponsor. They'd contributed $50,000, which would fund art supplies and instruments for 12 schools in underserved neighborhoods. "Miss Hayes is warming up backstage," the director told him. "Would you like to say hello?" Vincent's stomach flipped. "I don't want to disturb her before a performance. I think she'd appreciate it. She specifically mentioned you when we discussed sponsors." Backstage was quiet, dimly lit. Vincent found Nina sitting at an upright piano in a small practice room. She was playing scales. her fingers moving up and down the keys with mechanical precision. Warming up. She looked up when he knocked on the open door. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, stopping mid-scale. "You came. Please call me Vincent." And of course I came. Your letter, it meant a lot. The foundation is proud to support this. She stood up, smoothing her concert dress. I wasn't sure you'd respond. I thought maybe it was too awkward given everything. It's not awkward. Or if it is, it's the good kind of awkward. The kind that means we're both trying to move forward. Nina smiled, and it reached her eyes. My father told me he went to see you. I didn't ask him to do that. I know. He made that clear. He's a good man. You're lucky to have him. I am. She sat back down at the piano, not playing, just resting her hands on the keys. When I heard about your foundation, about what you named it and why, I cried. Because I realized that night didn't just change me. It changed you too. It woke me up, Vincent said. Showed me who I'd become. Who I didn't want to be anymore. That takes courage. Most people who get called out just get defensive. They double down. But you actually listened. I didn't have a choice. What you said. About how I couldn't see people's worth until it was performed in front of me. That was the truth. And the truth doesn't care if it hurts. They talked for 20 minutes about the foundation, about Nina's music, about change and growth and the difficulty of becoming better. It was easy, surprisingly easy. Like talking to someone who understood something fundamental about you. I should let you finish warming up, Vincent said finally. But Nina, thank you. For giving me a chance to be better. For writing that letter. For not writing me off completely. Everyone deserves a chance to change, she said. Not everyone takes it. You did. The concert was extraordinary. Nina played Chopin, Debussy, and Gershwin. She played her grandmother's favorite nocturne. And Vincent watched from the audience as the entire hall fell silent, transported. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Afterwards, there was a reception. Donors and supporters mingled, drinking wine and discussing the impact of arts education. Vincent found himself talking to a teacher from one of the schools that would receive instruments. She told him about a student who showed up every day just to play the beat-up keyboard in the music room because he didn't have a piano at home. With these new instruments, the teacher said, her eyes bright, that boy will have something good to practice on, something that will make him believe he can actually become a musician. Vincent thought about Nina, about his grandmother, about all the people whose talents never got the chance to bloom because they were too busy surviving. What's the boy's name? He asked. Daniel Martinez. He's 12 years old and he has perfect pitch. Tell Daniel that if he keeps practicing, if he keeps believing in himself, the foundation will make sure he gets a scholarship when he's ready for college. The teacher grabbed his hand. Are you serious? Completely serious. Have his parents contact the foundation. We'll set something up. That night, driving home through the city streets, Vincent felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Real purpose. Not the hollow satisfaction of closing another business deal. He was helping Daniel Martinez. He was helping Nina's former co-worker become a paralegal. He was helping people see their own worth. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for coming tonight and for everything you're doing. You're not the same man from La Lumiere. That man couldn't have sponsored tonight's concert or promised a scholarship to a 12-year-old boy he's never met. That man couldn't have changed. But you did. That matters, Nina. Vincent pulled over to the side of the road. He read the message again, feeling something tight in his chest loosen. Not forgiveness, exactly. You don't get to demand forgiveness, but maybe something like acceptance. Acknowledgement that people can grow, that mistakes don't have to define you if you're willing to do the hard work of becoming better. He typed back, thank you for seeing the possibility of change in me before I saw it in myself. And thank you for not giving up on your dreams. The world needs your music. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. The world needs people who recognize their own privilege and use it to lift others up.
Keep doing what you're doing. Vincent sat in his car for a long time after that.
Watching the city lights reflect off the windows of buildings where people were working night shifts, chasing dreams, surviving and hoping and fighting for something better. He thought about his grandmother playing piano in a cramped apartment, about Nina serving tables while studying music, about Daniel Martinez and his beat-up keyboard, about all the invisible people doing beautiful things that nobody noticed. And he made a promise to himself, to his grandmother's memory, to Nina, To everyone, the foundation would help in the years to come. He would notice. He would see people. He would use his wealth not as a weapon or a shield, but as a tool to open doors for others. It wasn't enough. It would never erase what he'd said that night at La Lumiere. But it was something, and something was better than the nothing he'd been before. Vincent started the car and drove home, already thinking about the foundation's next initiative. There was work to do, good work, the kind his grandmother would have been proud of, the kind that,